Okay, so we're sharing in the group now. So thanks to anyone who joins in today or watches us later. I know a lot of people watch later because of the different time zones. So just welcome to everyone who's watching. I'd like to introduce you all to Madeleine Ryan. So thanks for joining us, Madeleine. Madeleine is an Australian writer, director, and author. Her articles and essays have appeared in the New York Times, SBS, Vogue, the Daily Telegraph, the Sydney Morning Herald, VICE, Bustle, and Lenny Letter. And she's currently working on the screen adaptation of her debut literary fiction novel, which is A Room Called Earth. So I read A Room Called Earth, and really recommend it. I have to say it is something a little bit different. And really love the colours on the cover. I hope everyone can see the beautiful cover. So thanks so much for joining us. Is there something else you'd like to tell us about yourself and about your book?
Just that I'm so happy to be here and to have been chosen by you, Jackie. And I'm so glad that you enjoyed the book and find it unusual and unique. It is kind of like a little treasure or a little gemstone to find in the bookshop. And it's had the response has been really warm and multidimensional. And I'm really enjoying experiencing how all different kinds of people seem to be sort of relating to it in all different ways. And so, I hope that if anyone in the group, picks it up and delves in, that they go on an adventure that nourishes them in whatever way. Yeah.
Is there something you could share with people watching about the book?
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess writing it was an adventure for me. And so I hope it's sort of that for the reader. It's kind of very close to my heart and has brought me a lot of joy, the whole process of kind of birthing it into the world. And I'd like to think that that's radiated through every step of the process of writing it, editing it, the cover art and sharing it. And then as it reaches people, it sort of touches something unique in everyone. So, I guess that's all I have to really sort of share about it, aside from like the tangible things about the story, like it's set over one night in Melbourne, and it's all inside the mind of a sort of sensitive, dynamic, contradictory, honest, neurodiverse woman, although it's never kind of clearly stated that she's neurodiverse, but she is. And so she's got a very kind of multi-dimensional inner world that you're invited into for this 24 hours. And she goes to a party in Melbourne, and she sort of meets all different kinds of people, and it's all about her observations and the different feelings and thoughts she brings into each moment. And then she sort of leaves this party that she goes to and then comes back and is thinking about leaving when she meets this guy. And through the connection that she has with him, I feel like the story kind of expands in different ways, because I feel like that's what, when we connect with one another, there's this kind of growth or expansion that happens through each other's, I guess, awareness of one another, or what we bring to, a relationship is so, complex and miraculous. So when that happens and she creates that actual connection with him, it's sort of the story kind of transcends and explodes in all these beautiful ways. So, I guess those are the tangible things of, plot, so to speak. But so it functions on lots of different levels, I guess. That's what I have to say about it.
No, that was great. Thanks. And could you tell us a little bit about when you decided you wanted to be a writer? Is it something that you've thought about from your childhood, or something that just suddenly came to you? Or?
Kind of a combination, actually, because my parents are both journalists or critics. So I grew up in a house sort of surrounded by books, surrounded by daily newspapers and people writing, it was always a part of my life. But I was like, no, that's not for me. I was sure that I wanted to be an actress. So I went to uni and I ended up studying a lot of literature and creative writing because I didn't want to do exams, really. And those subjects didn't have exams. And it took me years and years and years to finish. I found uni really hard. And then even when I chose those subjects, and then I went to acting school and I was doing a lot of theatre. And it kind of took all these different life changes. Like I moved to the country and I, met my partner, and we adopted animals and started eating plant-based, and kind of all this space opened up because I'd lived in the city my whole life. So to be in nature was a really different experience, and I got to sort of think a bit more clearly and hear myself a bit more clearly, it felt like, because I'd become very sort of overstimulated in the city and in ways that I'd never realized before. And I'd always kept journals, but I'd never really thought seriously about writing. And then it kind of just started to flow, and I started writing articles, and, I was like, well, this feels good, so I guess I'll keep doing it. And as that unfolded, eventually I sort of heard the voice of the protagonist in the novel, that's at the center of the novel. And so I let her voice lead me into what's now become the book. So, and then that was functioning alongside writing different articles. And then about 6 months, I think it was, into writing the book, I was diagnosed as autistic. So that was another sort of adventure. There are lots of adventures going parallel to each other through the process, but that was another one that emerged through the writing process. And so, that's kind of the way I came to writing. So it was a combination of it being part of my childhood, but also rediscovering it like later. Yeah.
So some of the feelings in the book, some of the feelings you'd had yourself?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she's way more conclusive about things than I am. Like she kind of comes to these conclusions about certain patterns of behavior in people and how things are working in society, and observations that she makes. She's much more clear about where she ends up, whereas I'm constantly like debating and umming and ahhing about, what that person's intentions are and what the ramifications of that are, and like, how do I feel about that? And I'm constantly weighing that up, whereas she's much more like, well, they were doing this, and why would they do that? And, oh, I don't feel good with that, and I'm going over here now. It's much more, whereas I'm kind of constantly tormented. Which isn't to say she wouldn't come to different conclusions later on, who knows. But yeah, so yes, we share a lot of perspectives, but we have maybe different relationships to them at different times and things like that. Yeah.
And could you tell us a little bit about how hard or easy it was for you to have your book published?
Well, how hard or easy was it? There were definitely challenges, but they were kind of more, the challenges I faced were ones of faith in myself and in it more than anything else. Like, it was kind of being able to leap into the abyss and trust that what I'd written was as good as I could get it, and was the realization of the world that I wanted it to be, and that eventually someone would connect with that, and then that would, the stars would align. It was sort of constantly trusting that that would happen, even when I was being faced with rejection from agents or publishers or whoever it was. And, there was a lot of that, because that's kind of a integral part of these processes. I think it's like it's testing you, and so there was a lot of that. But even in the writing process, it was about being in the abyss too, because it's like, writing the novel had this very nurturing, expansive quality, but it didn't give me the immediate hit of interaction. And like, when I would write an article, I would pitch it, and an editor would say yes or no, and then I'd work on it with them, and then it would go live, and then there would be this response, and then there'd be money. And so it would be this kind of immediate process. Whereas the novel, it was like, I would go to write that, and I'm like, this feels amazing, but I don't know where it's going. I don't know who's going to believe in it. I mean, it feels correct to me, although I had to unlearn a lot of the stuff that I'd learned at university about writing. Like, I kind of had to forget about all of that and unpick it all in order to be able to hear her voice clearly, because she had her own ideas about where the story was going. And, the fact that it was set over one night kind of just emerged as what felt correct. So, yeah, it was a constant sort of, there were challenges, but they were more challenges of faith than, anything else, I think, for me.
So did you get quite a few rejections at first?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Early on, it was really funny, because I well, it wasn't funny at the time, but I'd been writing for publications in America, and I had American literary agents sort of reach out to me and say, oh, I'd be interested in representing you and whatever. I had sort of, I think it was 3 people who were interested, and I kind of was diligent, and I said, look, I'll just finish the manuscript and then I'll send it to you. But that kind of gave me a lot of confidence and this like structure to my writing, because it was like, oh, well, it's got somewhere to go once I finish it, which was quite helpful. But, then I got to that point and I sent it to each of them, and one of them said she had no room on her books anymore. I think one of them either didn't respond or went on maternity leave. I can't remember. And the third one was like, I have no idea what to do with this. I don't think I can represent it. And so it was like, oh my God, I was like completely floored and sort of back at square one. And then I was reaching out to, all different agents all around the world for, it must have been months. And, I was reading horror stories about how long that can take. And I was just like, no, like I want this, that doesn't have to be like that. Keep the faith, the right stars will collide. And then they kind of did. And once that agent took it on, she shared it, I guess. And then, the momentum kept going and it sort of all aligned. But yeah, you kind of never know. There are these long phases of being in the dark and just like praying that things are coming, whilst taking action where appropriate. It's then just this sort of waiting phase and getting through those times. That's the biggest test, really, I think.
Yeah. And I'm interested before we were talking about you're an Australian author, but your book was first published in the US. Was it not until it was published in the US before people would look at it in Australia?
No, it was actually taken by the Australian publisher first by a couple of months, but because of the lockdowns and everything, the Australian and UK publisher decided to push the publication date back until March of this year.
Yeah.
But the Americans decided to keep it where it was, which was in August. So that was the reason for that difference. But I'm really glad it worked out like that, because then it meant the Australian launch, we could actually have a party, which we did last month, because everything opened up in this sort of window. And it meant that we could have a party to sort of in Melbourne to celebrate a book about a party in Melbourne, which was so magical and fabulous, because it's really a celebration of the messiness and the wonder of social interaction. So it was so nice to be able to honor that with an in real life event.
Yeah, you're lucky you were able to do that.
I know.
And how did you go with promoting it in the US? Did you do a lot of Zooms and?
Yeah, I did a few Zooms, did a few sort of live events and different interviews for different book blogs, and a couple of radio shows and a few podcasts and things like that. It was it was good.
Yeah. No, that's good. We've got a few people watching, so just reminding people watching, if they do have any questions, to please type them in comments. Belinda's got a question for you. She's wondering if you'll be writing another novel, and if so, if you will continue with the same protagonist.
Look, I think she just exists in this one book. I don't reckon that she's got another one. I think that's her magical day. My partner and I are working on the screen adaptation of A Room Called Earth, so there will be more to explore of her universe in like a different format. But no, I don't, and there will definitely be more books. There are absolutely more books coming, but I don't think that they're not centered around her. No, they're different voices.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, she's very special and lovely, and it was so fun to go on that ride. But yeah, I don't think she'll continue.
And A Room Called Earth has quite a unique writing style. Will that continue in future books you write?
Probably the structure in lots of ways will appear in different forms. It's kind of like, because that comes quite naturally to me as the writer, as distinct from it simply being, the nature of her thoughts are one thing, but the structure of the book or how they're laid out is probably something that I would bring to a lot of my works, I guess. So but the content might vary, but the way that it's laid out would probably be similar
Mm.
each time. Yeah.
And I have to say, the structure of the book I found made it a lot easier for me to read as well.
Right. So
Yeah,
the
I
sense that
like
like the short
yeah,
chapters,
I
or
like the
yeah.
structure, and this like the wider spacing sometimes, and
Mm.
yeah, I quite enjoyed that.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Mm,
Yeah. The thing of spacing the dialogue on the page so
mm,
that there was lots of room around it
mm,
just felt right. Like
mm,
like right from the first draft, I was writing the dialogue like that. And for so
mm,
many reasons, it felt important to preserve that. And the publishers were really happy to do that. They thought that
mm,
was great. Yeah, the sense of space is really nice
yeah,
because, the blankness of a page is present just as much as the words are too. And it's
yeah,
easy to forget, but it's quite powerful to like utilize that.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. No, that was
Mm.
very effective. Yeah. Do you tell us if you have had someone who really encouraged you with your writing?
Probably my partner the most.
Mm,
Yeah, definitely my partner Hector. Yeah, I think that's, it's an interesting thing though, because even the people who, I'm thinking of all these uni tutors that I had who just kind of gave me some of the worst advice.
yeah.
But in a weird way, I thank them as well because it gave me something to push against,
Mm,
the things that I was told that I just, even at the time, I was like, oh God, that just doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound helpful.
mm,
It's almost like you need that to kind of strengthen your resolve about how you want to express yourself or something. Or I certainly found that. So in this weird way, even people who aren't supportive are giving you a gift or something, but certainly my partner was the one who was telling me like, oh, why don't you just write? Like clearly that comes easily
yeah.
to you. Like, come on, the acting's like good, but like, do you really enjoy it? And it's a bit of a grind and like, what are you up to?
Yeah,
So he was huge, like a huge force in me really claiming that for myself. And that's a really
yeah, that's great.
powerful and sacred thing. Like to have
Mm,
someone championing you like that close to me was like a huge influence for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's great. Could you tell us a bit more about your acting? What have you been at? What did you act on?
Yeah, so I actually met my partner at acting school.
Okay.
So I studied it and then I did a lot of theatre around Melbourne at different
Mm,
theatres for years. And was in a couple of short films and stuff like that. And I directed, the last sort of piece of, theatre I did was one that I wrote
okay.
and directed. And that was a very liberating experience, actually. It sort of was the culmination of all these years of, development. And it sort of gave me a taste, I guess, for the power of creating the whole world myself and that
Mm,
control,
mm,
I guess. So yeah, that, and I think that really influences both how I relate to people, but also my writing, that kind of theatricality or that like the expressiveness that came through all of those years of training and like learning about human behavior through acting school
mm,
was a huge rite of passage for me, and learning about it in the theatre and at uni theatre, but then performing at sort of La Mama and 45 Downstairs in Melbourne and things like that. It's like those were formative experiences as a human being, but also I think probably for my writing as well.
yeah. Mm,
Yeah.
mm. And I'm interested to know, do you read your reviews?
Oh, that's such a good question because I ask myself that every day. It's like I wake up, am I going to read them or am I not? I do.
Mm,
Um, but I do have like a kind of tormented relationship with it. I don't read the Goodreads too much, though I get glimpses and my partner kind of keeps an eye on it. But I have read the ones that are published in different publications and things.
yeah.
And I'm very blessed in that they've been very supportive and very encouraging
Mm,
because I'm aware, because my parents are both critics too of film and television. My dad's a film critic and my mum's a TV critic. So I grew up around a lot of criticism.
mm,
So I was kind of very nervous about that aspect of the process because there are no guarantees that the person is going to obviously resonate with the work. So I'm always going into it like, well, they might not, get it, and that's fine. I'll get
mm,
through it.
mm,
But I do feel very grateful that people seem to have been finding a way to connect with it, even if it's not something they're accustomed to in literature or something. They feel like safe with it, and like it can bring them joy or insight or some kind of nourishment. But yeah, I kind of I get nervous about reviews, but I read some, not others. Yeah, it's a day by day negotiation.
And I just want to show people again the cover. I'm interested to know, did you have anything to do with your cover?
Yeah, actually, Scribe was so communicative with me about it. Like right from the start, the publisher sort of said to me, you know, the designer, Alison Colpoy, is seeing, you know, because there's obviously a character of a cat in the book called Pork Chop.
Yep.
So Pork Chop is on the cover.
And do you have a
and
cat?
What?
Do you have your own cat?
I do actually, not a
do?
ginger cat, but I've got two. I live with two cats, and one of them is sitting next to me now. I love cats. I haven't lived with a ginger cat, but the protagonist lives with a fat ginger cat called Pork Chop. And so the publisher kind of came to me and said, you know, oh, Alison is seeing Pork Chop on a plinth. And I was just like, oh, that's perfect. Like that sense of a cat's kind of all-knowing gaze and observing and judging and discerning and being selective but comfortable in their own space, and like all the different things. I was like, perfect. And then at every point when she had different sort of versions of it, they were showing me and I was sharing my preference, and it was just it was a very positive and illuminating back and forth for that cover, and I'm so happy with it. It's like a treasure chest. I just adore it. Yeah.
And that's interesting to hear, because so many other authors tell us they really don't have much say in the cover at all.
Right. And I heard that too, and I was accustomed to that. I feel very again very blessed that it was so sensitive to all of that and interactive.
And Pork Chop is an interesting name for a cat.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
It just came to me immediately as he entered the story. Like the first night that I heard the protagonist's voice kind of in my head and she started speaking to me, the next thing that came was this fat ginger cat, and it was like, he's called Pork Chop. Like it was just instant, you know, and I don't know where that came from or how or why, but it just felt correct right from the start. So I just went with it, and then he came to life. So yeah.
No, very cute. Could you tell us what you like reading yourself? You told me that you read probably a bit different than maybe other people might read.
I do. Well, in part because although I grew up around a lot of books and obviously journalism and all sorts of things, I reckon for about 10 years, so from sort of my late teens, early 20s, I just didn't read any fiction. Like I stopped. I think on some kind of unconscious level, I was keeping that away because then I could find my own voice, because I do have a tendency to mimic. Like I can very easily copy the style of something. And I think it was kind of cluttering me, and I was really drawn to spirituality and self-help books for years and years and years and years. I still am. That's the main bulk of what I read. Is very much in the spirituality, self-help, psychology sort of as part of the bookshop aspect of the bookshop. So that's the main part of my reading. In the last kind of few months, I've started reading fiction again.
Okay.
But then at the same time, when I think about the influences on this book, say like the different books that might have been a part of what helped shape the world of this book on some level, I can actually think of a few different books from when I was a teenager or at uni that were probably quite instrumental in shaping it, like Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, which is obviously all kind of in what's his name? Holden Caulfield's mind. I read that when I was like 13, but I think that had a really lasting impression on me. And like the philosophy of Andy Warhol, which isn't a fiction, but is, you know, his thoughts about things and quite short chapters. It's like I read that when I was maybe 19, and I think that had a major influence too. And I haven't read it for years. And then The Secret Garden is a major one for me that I think affected me really deeply, because I'm very drawn to fairy tales. Like I've still got like on this shelf behind me, I've actually got all these children's books. Like I love fairy tales and like those kind of moral fables that are set in these beautiful settings, and that's very much a part of A Room Called Earth as well. Like that sense of her, where she lives and her world and her connection with nature is so magical. And I kind of have this belief that, you know, if you're going to show me difficult things about people or about the world, like put it in a beautiful setting. You know, I need it to at least look lavish so it's easier to digest the more painful things. So I'm really drawn to that about a lot of fairy tales and those sorts of stories. So yeah, I have a very eclectic kind of reading, like a collection of books that I'm reading at any given time. Like right now I'm reading a book called Super Attractor by Gabrielle Bernstein, and she's like a sort of self-help guru type who's written great books about manifesting abundance and like all these great things. And then I've also got a book by Dostoevsky, so that's a fiction, called Demons, which is like a zillion 100 pages, which I'm really enjoying, just sort of chipping away at, you know. And so there's, yeah, I've usually got all different things happening all at once now. But yeah, so it's quite a multifaceted answer to that question of what I'm reading and why. But yeah.
No, that's good. And did you do any research for writing your book?
I did research about a lot of the flowers and the native and exotic flowers that she sort of connects with and that she cares for in her garden. I did research on the Aboriginal history that she talks about in terms of the land that she's living on and the history of it. And she's currently reading a book called Aboriginal Country by Lisa Belair, who was an amazing sort of Aboriginal, not sort of, she was an Aboriginal poet and broadcaster and activist and writer and photographer, and just this incredible force in Melbourne sort of during the 80s and 90s. And she's got this great book of poems called Aboriginal Country, which I discovered as I was writing the book, and I just couldn't help but sort of intertwine her with the story in different points, in different ways. So yeah, I was sort of, I guess I count that as research. There was other things too, but yeah, so it was mainly the Aboriginal history and the natural history of the environment that she's in. Yeah,
no, that's interesting. Thanks. And if people want to keep in touch with you, are you on some social media and that people can?
No, I don't actually have social media. I'm not on there, but I do have a newsletter. So if you go to my website, madeleineryan.com, and sign up for my newsletter, I send it out kind of every season. Also, a sort of newsletter with all different things, and you can email me through my website as well. But no, I'm not on social media. I don't think there'd be a book to talk about if I was still dealing with social media. So yeah, it would be lovely to stay in touch.
People can keep in touch through your website.
Yeah,
no, that's
for sure.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been great chatting to you.
No, thank you for having me, Jackie.
I think seeing a screen adaptation of A Room Called Earth could be amazing.
Oh, yay! I hope so. Yeah.
So I hope to see that sometime. Lots of interesting scenery and the flowers and everything. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So thanks so much, and maybe we can have you joining in another time.
Oh, I'd love that. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone who joined and watched on. Thank you. Bye.